Hello, listeners. Hi, my name is Madhavi, and I'm so happy to have you on UppTalk. You have come to the right place if you want to learn about IT and do really cool things with your hands. We are not just another IT company when I say UppTalk. Think of us as your learning partner dedicated to helping you reach your full potential. We have top notch hands on courses to help you build your business, whether you are new to technology or want to move up in your current job. Let's look around this as our first step towards learning.
Trending reports, and this is something we discussed during our day one session when we spoke about report types. They allow us to extract that trend right. If our use case is to understand our data on a recurring basis over a period of time, monthly, quarterly, yearly, that's when we create a trending report. Now, trending report, as I mentioned, is very similar to a matrix report. There are just three broad exceptions or differences between a matrix report and a trending report. Other than that, they are very similar. The task for creating is again, let's start proxy. What is happening? Right? I'll select the report type as trending. Here comes the first difference between a matrix report and a trending report. The first difference between a matrix report and a trending report is the data source. Workday has delivered a very specific data source for trending reports. The data source is called trended workers. Let's go through the description of a standard or normal data source. For example, I'm looking at the description of this data source. When I say standard, I mean a non-trended workers data source. This data source accesses the worker as its primary business object and returns one row for each worker. If my organization has 5,000 workers or 500 workers, the data source would return me one row, one record for each of those workers. Let's see what does this data source do. Again, this data source is built on worker. The business object itself is called trended workers, but it ultimately accesses the worker as its primary business object. But then it doesn't return me one row for each worker. Instead, for each worker, it returns multiple rows. For each worker, this data source returns me multiple rows of data. What are those rows of data that this data source returns? The first one is the activity data. What is an activity? An activity is basically any staffing transaction that has happened on the worker. I get hired in January. That is one activity. In March, I get transferred. I get promoted in April. These are all activities that this data source is tracking. And finally, probably in December, I'm terminated. For me, it would include these 4 activities. Plus, for me, it would also store this snapshot data. At the end of each period, it determines the snapshot of each worker, whether the worker is active or terminated. In January, when I'm hired, my snapshot stores one snapshot for me. That means at the end of January, I'm active, right? There's one activity in January, which is I was hired, and then one snapshot. Feb, there was no activity. There's just one snapshot that I'm active. March, I'm promoted. An activity and a snapshot. This data source captures all activities. And when I say all activities, just the staffing activities. It doesn't track, for example, if I go on a leave. It doesn't track those kind of business history. It captures all activity data and snapshot of the worker each period. Now it includes worker activity and snapshot data for the last 36 months. At the maximum, because the type of data that this data source is handling is huge, right? For each data, it captures all of their transactions. That's why it only holds data for the last 36 months. And unlike other data sources, which are instantaneous, it means if I hire a worker in the system and then quickly run this report, the worker would be included in this report. Right? All the other data sources, all the other reports, they are referencing data in real time. However, this data source doesn't do that. It actually refreshes in the background at regular intervals. If the refresh has not happened, and that happens automatically, we'll see that it wouldn't reflect those latest transactions or activities or snapshots. It stores last 36 months of data refreshes in the background at regular intervals to go ahead and capture the data. And then there are some built-in prompts. Right. The first difference between a matrix report and a trending report is that we build a trending report on this specific data source that Workday has delivered. All right. Let This data source and this business object comes with a host of unique fields which are only available on this business object for the purpose of extracting this trending data. Now, the second difference between a matrix report and a trending report. The purpose of a trending report is that it allows us to extract a trend, right? You get data over a period of time. One of the grouping parameters of a trending report is always time period. If you look at the trending tab, all the other tabs are similar. With the same set of capabilities we have if you see the column grouping, which is optional. We have the fields to summarize with the same set of options, but there's no row grouping. right? And that's because the row grouping here is the time period. There are three options for capturing the trend. I can show the trend on a monthly or a yearly or a quarterly basis, with a month being the minimum granularity. I cannot show trend on a weekly basis or a granularity which is less than a month. I'm selecting quarter. And here we are seeing will show time period on the rows or as a row grouping. Instead, if I say we'll show time period as a column grouping, you'll see then row grouping becomes enabled and it is required. One of the grouping parameters is always time period in trending reports, and the other one could be anything. For example, it could be gender or company or cost center or any of those groupings that we created with our matrix reports. For now, I'll change it back to rows. We need a time period on rows and I can define optional grouping. Let's say gender if I want to as the column grouping. Let's run this report. Now again, the default summarization is count. But in this report, count actually doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's see why. I'll run this report. As I mentioned, it comes with a host of inbuilt prompts. Alright, our row grouping parameter is time period and we selected quarter as the grouping parameter. This is quarter 1 of 21, quarter 2 of 22 and on and forth. Each of those quarters, it's giving me a count. Look at the count and this looks suspiciously high, right? Obviously, when we ran our advanced reports, matrix reports, overall we know that there are some 7,000 odd workers. That's it. But count if you see it's less than 8,000. Now, the reason for this is, let's look at one of those numbers. For each worker, if you see it, every month it captures a snapshot. Plus it captures any activities that have happened. But storing multiple instances and it returns more than one rows for each worker. When we use count, it is simply counting all the instances as we discussed yesterday. If you see, because we are running it on a quarterly basis and quarter would have 3 months. It's simply showing us a snapshot for each worker on a monthly basis. Plus, if there are any activities, it is also showing those activities. Right. 1, 3, 4 has some activity. There are a couple of snapshots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he's terminated. Again, that is the snapshot for this worker in every month of that quarter. Again, there is some snapshot for this worker and on and forth. If I run this report on a monthly basis, it will just show me one snapshot for that month plus all activities for that month, right? As I mentioned, the count actually doesn't make sense for this data source. Instead, what we need is to use those specific or special fields that Workday has delivered for this data source. Right? Instead of count, I'll use the summarization of sum, and there are a host of fields available here. For example, I want to get some activity data. I want to get the number of employees hired in a given quarter. And these fields are all associated with trended workers. They are not available on other data sources. If you have to get the same data through other reports like Matrix, it's not that easy. This data source allows me to quickly build that. And then there are a host of other fields: termination count, involuntary termination count, voluntary termination count, and on and forth. There are fields related to promotion count transfer in, count transfer out, count on and forth. There are actually quite a few fields available. If I select transfer, the number of people who are transferred in, transferred out. You can use them. What I want is I need the head count. Now this time data makes much more sense, right? This is how I would read this data. The ending head count or the snapshot as of the end of, let's say, quarter 3 of 2021 was 1405. In quarter 4, 43 people were hired. It would be 4205 plus 43, which is 48, 4208 minus 25, because 25 people were terminated, which gives me 42 and 23. Not all numbers will perfectly align because maybe in addition to higher set terminations, there could be some transfers in or transfers out. But then this is how you can read this information, right? The ending snapshot. Any question? The ending snapshot here is basically the addition of employees with your hire minus any terminations. That's how you're getting this output. And I want to get further clarity on this. If I go back, there are two options with which I can run this report. If I select snapshot, and you'll see I only get any questions. If there are no questions, can we please be reviewed? How's he doing? It's a name. I muted everyone. Where were we? When run this report to only fetch records of type snapshot. You see that I don't get values in here. Snapshot is basically the status of the worker as of the end of that period. Active terminated. And if I run this report, here it Then I get the activity data. Alright, trending reports allow me to get a trend or my worker details. Now other capabilities on a trending report. Other capabilities of a trending report are similar to a matrix report. I can, for example, build any calculations. I can get maximums, minimums, averages. Exactly same as a matrix report. I can define the drill down options. I can define the detailed data override options. I say, do not drill down to. In terms of drill down, all the options are exactly similar. I can define filters. I can define prompt criteria similar to how what we do with our matrix reports or an advanced reports. Again, prompt options are exactly the same. The output options are exactly the same. Again, I can get this data in terms of a chart. A table, both chart and table, I can label my report as a worklet. Again, the sharing options are exactly the same and the advanced options are the same. In terms of the other capabilities, both these reports are very similar. This is another option. Again, this is common for all the report types we have discussed. It's just that we didn't look at that till now. We can also create and assign tags to our reports. Let's say all talent related reports, you want to assign a tag. You can click here, create a tag called talent. And then when you search for that report using search prefix for talent, all those reports will show up. Maybe you're working on a number of reports and you want to tag them as in progress. You can basically create any tags, right? They allow you to group your reports together. Let's see what tags are available. People have created, and this is simply a text field. You can create any kind of tags for the reports and you can tag your reports to them. And this is true for any report type, advanced or matrix, or any of the report types can be linked to a tag. Let's quickly and I get the same type of chart. I can click on the legends and then this would highlight me that specific area on the cell. It is again same as we saw yesterday. Again, just like a matrix report, if I want, I can expand or increase a specific area. Any questions till now? No? All right, perfect. Now we looked at the data source definition and it mentioned that data source refreshes in the background. Right now, the another difference between a normal data source and a trendy data source, as we discussed, is that it doesn't capture your data instantaneously. In fact, all other data sources are available to you by default, but the trended workers data source has to be activated. If you don't do that, then your trended workers data source doesn't capture any data. If you go to tenant setup, and within that if you go to trended setup, reporting and analytics, click on edit. You have to first enable worker friendly. In this tenant, it is enabled. As part of your tenant setup, if you want to use trending reports, then you'll have to enable this feature. Right, then you'll have to go to this task, which is maintain trended workers. This is where we do the configuration for trended workers. It also shows me if you see the status of the background run. The background run happened last time on the 28th. The job ran for some 5 seconds, probably 5 minutes. It was an update job. The status was completed and some 4 records. Some fields were executed and the data source has this many records in total. It shows me the status of the background job that is running. Then if I come to configuration, here we see the trending start date. Now the trending started, if you see, is, even if I set the trending start date, let's say to 2010, the data source only captures 3 years of data. If you look at the description, it specifies the earliest date that worker trending data will be captured for. Note that worker trending data tracks the last 36 periods of worker data or worker data that occurred on or after this date. Even if I change this to 2010, then it will only capture data till October of 2018 to 19 or 19. Because that's 36 months, 19, 20 to 21, 21 to 22. At the maximum, it will capture data in October or November of 2019. Or if I, let's say, set it 2021, then it will capture data till 2021. It only captures data comparing these two dates and whichever has results in fewer periods. This starting date is less than 36 periods. It will capture data till that. If it is greater than 36 periods, then it will capture only the last 36 periods. Trending period, as I mentioned, you can set the trending period as a month or a quarter or as a year. And that's why when we ran our report on a quarterly basis, we saw 3 snapshots for each worker. Because it's capturing data on a monthly basis, or at least it's capturing snapshots on a monthly basis, plus all activities that happen. And that's the minimum granularity. If you decide, no, I want to capture data on a weekly basis, daily basis, that cannot be done. Right. You can set the trending period to be a quarter or a year or a month. Number of retroactive periods. There's also a description here. They enter the number of historical periods recalculated by the incremental update for worker trending. Enter 1, 2, 3 to recalculate the data daily. Work date seems has changed the description. Traditionally, what happens is if the trending, the number of retroactive periods is defined to 3. That means this data source will go back 3 periods in the past and see if there are any retroactive changes that have happened. Let's say this data automatically refreshes in the background. October it ran and it captured all activity and snapshot. November is also over. It ran probably every 2 days and then captured all activity and snapshot. Now, let's say I terminate an employee today, 1st of December, effective, let's say 1st of October. Right? Now the data has actually changed. Right. In October, it said the number of hires were, let's say, 10. The number of terminations were 5 and the overall count was 100. In November again, maybe. In November again, maybe 10 people were hired. One person was terminated, which gives me overall count of 109. Now in December, I have terminated one person, effective October, which means it will have to recalculate. Right? Because now actually what should happen is because I realized that I should have terminated one person from October and or maybe hired someone from October and I didn't do that. Now it will have to recalculate data in the past. Then now the actual count would change. Number of terminations would be 6. This becomes 99. Right? And this becomes 28. The number of trending retroactive periods basically specify the number of periods it will go back in the past and do that retroactive calculations the way we do for payroll. If you are aware of that, and again, the maximum number of periods at least earlier was 3. Now looks like Workday has changed the description of this and it's related to some calculations. Enter the number of recalculated update. It specifies enter the number of historical periods that are recalculated. Historical periods for this. If we are in December right now, November, October, September, these are all historical periods. And what is a period for us? It is a month. Right. And then we have a couple of other options. Do we want to include terminations? Do we want to include international assignments? On and forth. Right. We configure the trended workers data source based on which it captures the data. In every other aspect, trended workers data source, as we discussed, as we just saw, is similar to a matrix report. Any other questions on this, or we can move on? Let's look at a few other report types. I will not spend a lot of time there. Just want to quickly show you that they are similar to the report types we have looked at. One of those report types we'll look at is the search report. If you remember, we looked at this report called Find Workers. And we said this is a search report. It has this faceted search option. This is similar to it. Advanced Report with additional options on the left-hand side, and I can select these options and it will automatically refine my data. Alright, let's look at. Let's look at the definition of this report. People have created some copied reports. I'll pick one of those. Again, we create them using create custom report, taking the report type as search will not go into those details. The data source again, if you see is the same or similar, we can use all this. Search reports are built on indexed data sources. Again, within the data source we have under the first tab, we have these columns that we can add. Now there are different types of columns we can add. The first one is primary results field. This is the field which is highlighted in bold. Right to right, and we have said it would be worker. And then the additional data that we want to show. This is basically the data that is shown below. Right, supervisory org and location, and I think position. If I edit it again, this is not this report. I'm just showing you one of the copied reports. This is not the standard report that we are running. Someone has copied this actually. The same logic, the data source has been selected. Let's see if standard data sources are available. No, right? For a search report, the difference is only indexed data sources are available. Right index data sources from that business object are available. Once again, in the first column you add all the fields, the difference being only fields from the primary business object can be added. Unlike the advanced report, wherein you had a business object column as well, wherein the default was worker. But then we could also add fields from the related business object right here. That option is not available. We can only add fields from the primary business object that we have selected on the report. Right? I can select fields from the business object defined. When I go in here, we can say which of these is the primary results field, and then show whatever fields we want to show. And other options are similar. We can define filters, prompts, output, they're all the same. The only difference is if I go to the Advanced tab and scroll to the bottom, we specify the facet filters. These are the filters which are displayed on the left-hand side. On the Advanced tab, we specify the facet filters that will be available. I can specify again. These are all available from the business object you select. We specify the facet filters. That would be available. And how these facet filters will be available on your report. They are sorted alphabetically. They would appear alphabetically. right? Starting with A, B, and on and forth. Most of these reports, if you see, are similar. It is just that Workday has tweaked and aligned these reports for specific requirements. Else, in all aspects, these reports are very similar to the basic reports, which is advanced report or a matrix report. All right, any questions? This one other option we could talk about, and this is again relevant for most of the report types that we have seen. Right? We'll look at this in terms of the matrix report, but then this can be used anywhere. Let's look at this in terms of what example can I think of? Let's look at our matrix report and now if you remember when we were adding our age field yesterday, system would show us some additional options on the right hand side. If we added the age field on our report, I think it would already be there. We have removed the age field now. We have removed those options now. When I add a system automatically adds some of these options. And I am getting or I get an error. We didn't worry about this error till now, but if we look at this error, it says select only one analytic indicator. Now when I go in here under options and we click on create, and these options were also available on matrix report. If you go to a matrix report and we created our detailed data override yesterday, but under that, this again an option to create. There was at least another option to create analytic indicator. Now, what are these analytic indicators? Analytic indicators, as the name suggests, they show you data in a graphical format. If I go in here, or let's create a new one. If I go in here, I can create analytic indicators again throughout the tenant or specifically for this report. I'm selecting and create analytic indicator for the report, and here Workday has delivered us a lot of visualization types. I can select any one of these. If I select, let's say, status green, yellow, red, these are all Workday delivered. Now I can paste on the field. I can decide a condition. Let's say my condition is if employee's age is. Let's say less. Yes, because I selected the visualization type as green, yellow, red. I can then say what visualization to be displayed. I want the visualization to be clean. If, on the other hand, and the reason I get control field as age because I'm creating this analytic indicator for each. I can create it for any other parameters. Usually, if you have seen, you see a progress bar, right? Or you see other. You see these indicators with respect to performance usually. We can create these analytic indicators for any of the reports or any of these field types based on our requirement. I'm saying if age is, let's say, greater than or equal to greater than. FIFA, show me a red diamond. If is greater than or equal to 21, then show me a yellow triangle and I can add some help text. I would give it a name. Once these indicators are created, they can be used throughout the tenant. Some of these, if you see, are already created and they get automatically added. This specific one I have only added for my report. This wouldn't be available in other reports. Up to 55, I get yellow triangle. And if it is less than 20, I get green. Right, these are used for that visual representation and we can create these analytic indicators for any of the fields. These are pretty helpful, especially when we are designing our matrix reports. Any questions? Do you want me to quickly show you once again or this makes sense? Can we take the break? That's fine. We can let me start the timer and we can be back. Thank you. Perfect. We have looked at a few different report types to now. Let's talk about, excuse me, discovery boards. Now, discovery boards is one of the latest additions to the report inventory that Workday has delivered. And discovery boards was earlier part of Prism Analytics. Again, we'll not talk about Prism Analytics here because it's a complete course in itself. But if I have to quickly give you an understanding of what Prism Analytics is, traditional Workday reporting, it allows you to extract data, build data, or build reports for data which is part of your work-based system.
Right.
Basically, your HRR data, your recruiting data, your HCMM data, or maybe your finance data, if it is available within Workday. Prism Analytics, on the other hand, allows you to do reporting on both Workday as well as non-Workday data. It acts as a data warehouse, right? AI too. What you can do is you can get data from multiple sources. You can get worker data from Workday, let's say. Plus, you can also get data from outside Workday. Maybe you can get data about employee surveys, right? From your third-party survey tools, you can get maybe payroll data if your payroll runs outside Workday. If you can get your finance data, your costing data, your expense data, and usually these are all outside Workday systems. You can load data into your Workday tenant. Then you can transform this data. Now you have brought data from Workday, let's say on a yearly basis, and this is a very common use case for Prism Analytics. There are, of course, hundreds of others. You conduct an annual survey. Now, usually surveys are anonymous. Right. They'll ask you a series of questions and then they decide the organizational health or the employee satisfaction. But let's say you want to club this survey results with your employees in the sense you want to understand. Let's say, what is the belonging score among your females versus males? Right. What is or how your employees are being promoted across, let's say, various ethnicities. How male, white people are getting promoted versus maybe black males or people from other genders. You want to understand your survey results in conjunction with, let's say, all these parameters: ethnicity, gender, nationality, veteran status. Now, all this information is part of Workday. It is collected, maintained in Workday as part of employee information. If you want to get this kind of reporting, wherein you have some data in your Workday system and other data which is outside Workday, and then get that understanding or true understanding of your data in terms of belonging, equity, value, inclusion of your employees and different employee groups, then you'll have to then join this data. Right? And do various kinds of transformations. In Prism Analytics, you can get data from multiple sources, then combine those data, transform the data, bring Prism calculations, and then finally create your own data sources. Unlike your traditional data sources, which are all Workday delivered, your Prism data sources is you create as part of your transformation. Do we have Prism here? Let me quickly see. This tenant doesn't have Prism, and Prism comes as a separate subscription. It is not part of your HCMM. Obviously, you'll have to pay extra and get a subscription, and then your tenant is enabled for Prism. The idea is you get data from multiple sources, you then transform, modify, you prepare your data, and then finally you publish that data. When you publish that data, a Prism data source gets created. And then using that Prism data source, you can create reports. You can create advanced matrix training reports and all the other report types. Plus, Workday delivered this discovery boards along with it. You could also do reporting or create this special kind of reports called discovery boards. How do you access discovery boards? Again, I'm not sure if discovery boards are enabled in this tenant, but let's quickly check. There's this folder called Drive. I don't think you can access discovery boards. That's a pain. Discovery boards don't work in proxy. Who is this user? J. Let's see if I can assign roles to Jason. Just want to see. Actually, the problem with discovery boards is that we cannot access it through proxy, which is what we have been doing, and looks like the user I'm logged in as. That user doesn't have access to the discovery boards, but I cannot find this user. Jason Boy. View Service Center. This person could be Service Center representative. How do we manage this? That's fine. Let me talk about something else for today, and then I'll connect with the institute and see how we can figure it out. Let's do one last try. If not, we'll talk about something else. I have no clue why I cannot actually. That's fine. Let's not waste any more time on this. All right, since we only use it because of the access like the row you have. Exact. Ex- if you see, I cannot even see my profile. It doesn't give me that option. I go to, I am not really sure whether this my account should have the, knows it not. Do you? Are you using this very tenant or you're using something else? We are using the same tenant and I guess we have the same kind of access. You wouldn't be able to. Let me check with the institute. The problem, if you see, you don't see that drive. That's because this user doesn't have access to drive. And then I have given it. I could just find one, Jason's Boyle, and I have given that user all access. But doesn't look at me. I have a look at it. I believe we have drive access and profile as well. We should have it. Could it check? I have logged into my tenant today. Just have a look and then we can. I'll speak with the institute and see if we can get a different tenant tomorrow. But in which way? Let's not waste our time. We can talk about have a look at this tomorrow. I wanted to cover discovery boards today and then a bit of composite reporting as well. Just a very basic flavor to show you how composite reports look like. And then tomorrow I wanted to dedicate for the remaining topics within advanced reports. There are some calculated fields that we have not covered. Some related instances count, related instances lookup, related value arithmetic calculations, currency conversion. These are again some important calculated fields that we have. Lookup value as of date. Some calculated fields that we have not covered. And finally, take any questions that you may have. That was the plan. Since we cannot access discovery boards today, I'll quickly show you how composite report looks. Again, we are not going to go in any detailed discussion. I'll just show you a basic report to just give you an understanding of what composite reporting can actually deliver. And as I mentioned, it's an advanced topic. We can spend at least 4 or 5 hours on composite report if we want to. The idea behind a composite report is that start proxy again. The idea behind a composite report is it allows you to bring data from multiple data sources. And there are other use cases as well. Let's talk about one of these use cases, which is to bring data from multiple subreports or multiple data sources. I want to create a matrix report to get me all the reports in the system based on the report type. We already have this report called all custom reports, right? But it gives us that detailed data. That is an advanced report. Similarly, work-based standard reports. That also gives us detailed data, which is perfectly fine. What I want is to simply get those numbers. There are 10,000 custom reports of type advanced. There are 500 custom reports of type matrix. I just need those high-level numbers. We know we can do that by creating a matrix report. I'm creating a custom report. And again, this, as I mentioned, is a very simple use case. I'm calling it a report of type matrix. And there is a data source for custom reports, which is called all custom reports, right? And this data source is built on this business object called custom report. Now, similarly, if I want to get standard reports, there is a data source called all standard reports, and this data source is built on this business object. Now, if you see, if I have to bring or show all reports in your tenant side by side, both custom as well as standard, I cannot do that. Right. Because both this is built on two different business objects and two different data sources for those business objects. Obviously, I cannot bring this data together into a single report matrix or advanced or trending or any of those report types because these are built on different business objects, different data sources. For these kind of requirements, we would then create a composite report ultimately. Let's start with the advanced reports because we have opened it. We are calling it KPMon G1 standard reports count. Usually we also use some report to basically identify that this is going to be a sub-report, and then we would go ahead and hide this report. This is where we spoke about this use case, right? Because this is not my ultimate report. I would want to use this in a composite report, and I don't want this report to be visible. I would ultimately go ahead and hide this sub-report. I want to get all reports, all standard reports based on the report type. There is a field called report type. And I'm getting the count. Let's run this. All right, plain and simple, it's giving me. There are 1600 advanced reports and I can click on this number and it will show me those details. 10 inbox reports and on and forth. Our first sub-report is ready. What I'll also do is I'll create another report. This report is built on the standard reports business object. Right, we are creating our second report. This is custom reports count matrix. For this business object, there's no index data source available. At times when you are building some report, you would have no index data source. And of course, then you'll have to fall back to a standard data source. You'll have no other option, right? Else, if there is an option, as I mentioned, always look for. If you see, there are just 3 data sources on this business object and they are all standard. Of course, there's no option to use an index data source here. Again, I want to get data based on the report type, and we have the count, and that's it. It's built on the custom report business object. Now quickly run it. Here I have 2 reports, one fetching me. The details of the standard are the custom. Now, when you're building your composite report port, right, the most important factor is how would you bring data together from your custom reports, from your sub reports. For that, let me first go to the task, and then we'll see what I mean by that. For the moment, I select report type as composite. If you see, my layout changes. It's asking me for a report name, which is report count. Now here I'll have to select a business object. Now that is the business object which will be used for both filtering my composite report as well as grouping. Now what is that grouping? I here have a requirement to group data from multiple sub-reports. It is asking me to select that business object which will allow us or which will allow this composite report to determine which sub-reports can be grouped into this report. Now, when selecting the business object here, we actually do not select the business object itself. And if you see, the business objects are in fact different on both of my sub-reports. The object that we select is actually that field which is common, or the grouping field which is being used in all the sub-reports. Here, if you see, the grouping field is actually report type that we are using. We need to use the common grouping field. Now, these 2 fields are in fact different in the sense they are not available even though the name is. They are both available on. They are both coming from this business object report definition related to report type, and they are available on 2 different business objects. When we are selecting our business object for the composite report, we don't select business object itself. What we select is the fields that are being used to group data on all our sub-reports. The most important factor when creating your composite report is to determine what grouping field you would use for your sub-reports. Because if you use incorrect grouping field, then you'll not be able to bring those reports together. Selected report type as my business object, right, which is in fact not a business object, it's a field. When I click, you'll see the layout of a composite report is very different from all the other reports that we have seen. This is how my composite report looks. Oh, I don't have full access again, which is very strange. There should be a gear icon here, and I do not know why I don't get it. Now the first thing that I'll define. On a composite report is the control field of. The control field would be the same as the business object you selected. If you see, in both these cases, we are grouping data based on the report type. Right. Similarly, when we are creating our composite report, we have to define how would we group our data. Right, I'll come in here and the first field or the first column that you specify. C1 is the control field which brings data together. Because there is only one business object that we have selected, report type A Workday automatically selects that as your control field. You could select multiple business objects as well. If your data has multiple reports with different grouping parameters. Again, those are all advanced use cases, I'm calling it. And there are a whole list of other options. I can do styling, I can define an outline structure, and on and forth. But we can also use an override field will if time permits. We'll have a look at that. But as I mentioned, those are all advanced concepts. The first field that I define is the report type. Now there are lots of options available here. Unlike a matrix report here, if I want, for example, I can include some gaps in my report. Right, I can leave cells vacant, I can leave rows vacant, I can define advanced styling. There are a lot of options available. I can define an empty row and on and forth. For example, I want to define an empty row that there's a gap. Right, and I'm calling it empty column again. I can do some styling if I want to. And after that, I want to define my control column or my data column. The next column is I want to get data right and I'm defining my data column. Here, I'll have to define from which sub-reports I want to get my data. Now the sub-reports that you see. If you see, we only have some 8 or 10 reports displayed here, including the reports that we create. Now, why is that only these sub-reports are being displayed? That's because only these sub-reports are using the same group by field as has been used on this composite report. Right? Only that is why that business object and this grouping field is important. If you don't select the correct group by field on your sub-reports and the business object on your composite report, then Workday would not display your sub-reports in here. Right here, based on that group by parameter and the business object you select, only relevant sub-reports will be pulled. The first sub-report I want to display is my standard report count. Now this report, I'll give it a name, this column. I'll call it standard report count. Now this sub-report only has one summarization. I could have added more summarizations as well, right? I could have. added any number of summarization types, but for our use cases, we just added one now because there's one summarization that gets defaulted. In here, you can select these summarizations that are available on your sub-report. Now, in our case, there's just count and that gets defaulted. Right, again, we can define styling repeated columns. These are all some of the advanced options available. And then I'm adding a data column. This time I want to get data from my second sub-report, which is the custom reports. I can come in here, select the sub-reports that are available, and this time I'm selecting all custom reports. We'll call it custom report count. This also has only one summarization that gets defaulted, and I'll say it. That should also be a gear icon here, and using that I can actually define, for example, prompts for the overall composite report. I can define who this composite report will be shared with, and it gives you other options. But I don't know why we don't see that option here. Again, not relevant for our use cases, but there should be that gear icon here. Now, when I run this report, if you see, we left one column blank. There's this blank column, and it is getting us data from both these reports. Plus I, in addition to this, let's say I want a new column which will give us the overall count. 600 plus 7,000. I need the total report count. I also want the count at the end. I can then define our custom calculations. All these are not really possible on your matrix report. In a matrix report, you cannot directly go ahead and add two summarizations. Of those kind of options open up on a composite report, I can add a new cell. And this time, I want to define a calculation. And the calculation I want to define could be a sum, could be a difference, could be a sum range, divide, multiply on, and for. I want to sum my column 3 with column 4. I can sum data in different from different reports, and I'm calling it report count. Right. Now it gives me that value. Till now, everything that we have been doing with respect to our column cells. Row cells again gives us some advanced options. We can define filters or individual rows. I'll just show you one use case. I want to get the overall count right at the bottom, which is not shown by default. What I can do is I can come in here and combine data. I'll just give it a name. Combine data. I want to basically combine data or join data together for each of these columns. And once I have joined the data, I want to display the total. I'll create a new calculation. I think it should be just sum. A sum range is when you want to sum. Let's say cell 1 to cell 10. That's a range. Sum is, let's say you want to add cell 1 and cell 5. There are two options that you'll see. One is sum and one is sum range. And this is, again, I'm calling it total. And now I have this total report count at the bottom. Again, I want to do some other stylings on my report. I can create my own custom styles. I can also use Workday delivered styles. For example, here I want to add a new style. Click on Style. Either I can click on Edit and then insert a style there. I come in here. You see, there's a style option here as well. We can add a work-based style or we can create a new formatting style. Workday has given us lots of styles. This is our total. I'll search for total. There is a style called grand total that Workday has delivered. This one. Again, there are lots of other styles you can. We can select those and see how those style looks. Or, as I mentioned, we can create our own custom styles. Now when I run it, this is the style for that total type. There's an arrow at the top that shows in bold and on and forth. Let's create one custom style. For our total. For total. Let's say, want to define my own style. Again, I can click on Edit, go inside and define the style there. Or I can click on Style directly. Instead of using one of the Workday delivered styles or one of the custom styles, I want to create a new formatting style. I'm calling it Reports Total. I'll click on. This is where I can define the style. For example, I can click on Override Number and then select one of the formats available. And for example, let's say I want to show this a couple of decimal places. I can define what options I want to select. Currently, it's a whole number that I see again. I don't want this. I can decide what font I want to use. With respect to font, let's say I want a regular font. Or maybe I want a bold font. Right? Size, I want to keep it. Let's say we don't need an underline. I'll say no underline. Color, I want to make it blue. There are just a few color options available. I'll say blue. Alignment, I can decide whether it is left aligned, right aligned. The fill color, I'm saying it should be, let's say, border. I don't want top border. I'll say no border on the top. Left, I want a border. I'll say maybe a double border. And that the border color should be black. Again, there are a few options available, not many. Right, again, I want a double border. It should be black. Bottom, I don't need any border. I'll say none. Right, and I can define other options which I'm not interested in. Created my own style, applied it to that particular column, and this time when I run my report, right, my style is displayed right. It's blue with a gray fill and double border. Right, you can define again. I could have done a conditional formatting saying, show me those or highlight those cells which are, let's say, value 0 or less than 10. I have a whole range of other options available. I can, for example, get a count or show data based on the month in which the report was created. This custom report count, I can get the output. Let's say in July 500 reports were created, in August 600 reports were created, and on and forth. I can do or get that repeating column out of this. There are a host of options available. Obviously, we will not talk about all of those in detail. But then this gives you a sense of what composite reports can achieve, right? They give you a lot of options which are not possible with any of the other report types involved. Any questions? All right, we would. I would take that as a no. I'm just thinking if I can quickly show you something else, which could be simple. That's fine. And I can go in here at this point in time. And I can now go ahead and exclude these reports from the search because I don't want these reports to be available individually. Since we have some time and we are not doing discovery boards, what we'll do is we'll talk about the remaining topics within advanced reports. We created our advanced report, which was worker details, and we added a number of calculated fields. Let's go ahead and expand our report. Now, if you see, we discussed about the filter tab, but we didn't. I think we didn't talk about the sub filter tab. Let's say you want to do a filter this report based on. Let's say compensation package. A compensation package, if you see, is a field which is not available on the worker business object. It is available on the related business object. It's a field which you are pulling on your report from the related business object of worker. Now I want to create a filter using this field. I've copied compensation packages. I go to filter, and let me search for compensation packages. Compensation packages are not available. Right? How do I create a filter? The reason this field is not available is because this field is not available on your primary business object. This is available on your related business object. If you want to create a filter using fields from your related business objects, then you cannot do that on the filter tab. You'll have to do that on the sub-filter tab. You'll come in here, click on Add. You'll select the related business object whose field you want to use as a sub-filter. The RBO in this case is compensation grade. Right. I'll come in here. Go to sub-filtered. Composition. Right, this is my related business object. Now from this business object, I want to build a filter using compensation packages. And I'll say it. And I have the same set of options. Again, let's say I want to prompt this to the end user. I can come in here and I say, prompt the user for value, prompt the user for value and ignore the filter condition. I have the same set of options that are available on the filter. Let's say I want to prompt this to the end user. I can add filters from multiple related business objects. I want to add filter from this business object. I can add or create a filter using multiple conditions and or the same logic applies. But apart from that, I can also create filters from multiple business objects. When I want to do that, I would again click on Add. Select that business object. Let's say this time I want to add a filter using addresses. Select that. Select the fields and create my filter. If I don't want a certain business object, I can go ahead and remove it. Once you've done that, you'll have to go back to your filter tab. Right. You'll have to add a new row. And in that row, you'll have to include the business object. You'll have to say compensation grade is not a. If you don't do that, then your sub-filters don't work. Once again, you'll go to your sub-filter tab. Define the business object using which you want to create your sub-filters. Create your filter condition. And similarly, you would add any number of business objects you want. Finally, you'll go back to your filter tab and include all of those business objects. For example, if I would have created a filter using addresses as well, I would have added a new tab and said addresses is not empty, and then selected and or condition whatever I want for my criteria. This is important whenever we are creating a subfilter. Now, when I run my report, because we prompted compensation packages, it would be prompted to the end user and then based on what we select. It acts as an end user. You cannot differentiate between a sub-filter prompt, a filter prompt, and even in terms of working, it will give you the exact same results. Right? We today spoke about analytic indicators. We spoke about tags. We spoke about composite reports. I'm just making it down, noting it down because I would know what to cover for the evening match. That was subfilters. What if you want to create subfilters or maybe reference some fields from the related business object on your matrix report, on your advanced report? If you see you have this option wherein you can select the related business object here, and even you have that sub-filter option here. An advanced report, you can reference all fields from the related business object. But as we saw with our matrix report, we don't have an option to directly pull any information from related business objects. Right now, for that, we can create a calculated field again. I should have covered it as part of matrix report. Before I forget, because we cannot directly pull any fields from the related business objects onto our matrix report, it doesn't give us that option, right? For example, if I want to pull compensation, packages here. If you see, this is a different field. It's not a multi-instance field. This is the one which is worker on, which is available on the worker business object, whereas the field that we are referencing here is the one which is a multi-instance field, which is available on, the, on, on this RBO. For that cases, we can create something called a lookup related value. Lookup related values for that matter can be used anywhere. It's not that they are only used for your matrix reports. They can also be created for your sub reports. For your advanced reports. We create a lookup related value and the ideas. As the name suggests, you are lookup related value. You're trying to look up the value of a field which is associated with the related business object. In this case, for example, worker is your primary business object. And let's say a supervisory organization is your related business object, and you want to get some field from the supervisory organization onto your worker business object. Right? This basically allows you to get data from the related business object and pull it on your primary business object. Once you have done that now, because that field is directly tagged to your primary business object, you can directly, for example, use it in your filters instead of having to pull into your sub-filters. Right, if I come in here, I can create a new calc field or report. And the calc field would be LRV, lookup related value, work, lookup related value. I'm just calling it worker. Right, in this case, our related business object is compensation grade, and from compensation grade, you want to pull compensation packages, right? My lookup field is compensation grade. Right, this is the field. Or this is the related business object. If you see, the moment you select this field, it automatically identifies that this field is associated with the related business object, compensation grade. Right, and now from this compensation grade, you want to get compensation packages. Right, all I'm doing is on the primary business object because compensation packages is not directly available. It's available on this related business object. I'm getting this information from compensation grade onto worker. I could have created the same thing here. I'll go in here again, look up related value. Work because we are creating report specific calc fields. This field will not be available on this report. That's why I'm recreating it here. Once again, I want to get data from CompGrade. Right? And the data or the field that I want to get is comp packages. Right? And once you do that, you can then directly reference that field on to your matrix report. Right? That is the advantage. And then you can also use this field now directly on the filter, either on your advanced report or on your matrix report. Now when I go for CF comp packages, Right now, I can directly build a filter using this field. Even in the case of an advanced report, I don't have to build a sub-filter. I can now directly add. If I go ahead and save it, I can directly create a filter using COM packages instead of having to add the sub-filter. Right lookup related value allows me to pull data from a related business object onto my primary business object. And this could be relevant for your advanced reports, as I mentioned, but this is extremely helpful when you're building your matrix reports, your trending reports, your search reports, wherein you cannot directly reference any related business object. You can only reference your primary business object, and that's it. The cal field is lookup related value. Now let's talk about a few other instance related calculations as well as arithmetic and numeric calculations. I would remove compensation packages. You don't need it here. I'm also removing grade. I'm also removing addresses. Here we have the total base pay amount. Right now, what I also want is to see the total compensation amount or total allowances that the employee is getting. Let me search an employee's compensation consists of two components. One is your basic salary, right? And plus you can get additional allowances, a PF and car allowance and mobile allowance and house allowance and on and forth. I have put the total base pay of the employee on my report. I also want to pull the allowance of the employee. There are a couple of fields. These are all CL fields. We will not consider any CAL fields for now. We'll assume as if CAL fields do not exist and we'll create our own CAL fields. There are two Workday delivered fields that I see, and everything else looks like a KL field. Right? We'll not worry about them. Let's take both of these fields. The first one looks like a text field. That's fine. Let me just add that field. And the second again, I think was a CAL field. I would also add that field here that we only get workers whose allowance is not empty. All said allowance plan assignments is not empty or is not vacant. It's giving me some 554 workers who have some allowances assigned. Now, this is a text related field, right? It's giving me a text representation of the allowance details. Let's quickly compare it with the worker data. If you go into the details for Logan McNeil, it says she has a car allowance of $500 per month. If I go to compensation, She has a car allowance of $500 per month, plus she has other allowances, some SSK mobile, which is 500, another 160, and then 5,000, which is what I see here, right? 60. She has 4 allowances. It is getting me all the information, but the information that I get is not very useful. What I would actually want is to get, for example, the sum of all the allowances that I get. Right? That's what I would want. For that, I will create a KLC field. I think we cover report access well. Then we cover LV. We should have covered ARI first, but that's fine. We are talking about SALI. What we'll do is I'll create a new CL field. And this KLC field is called the SARI, which is some related instances. What are we trying to achieve here? What we basically want is allowance is a related business object for worker. Each worker can be associated with 1, 0 to multiple allowances. Right? I want to take the amount of those allowances that a worker is associated with and then sum them. Right? And some related instances allows me to do that. Each worker is related to multiple instances of allowances and I want to sum the amount of those allowances. That's how I understand, or that's how you can understand this KLC field sum, related instances. CF worker. Allow. I want to take all the allowance plan assignments for the worker. Right, a worker would be assigned to 1 or 0 to multiple allowance plans. I want to take all the instances of allowance that the worker is associated with. And again, I can write a condition. Maybe I only want to add car allowance and mobile allowance, right? Or maybe I only wanted PF allowance and on and forth. I can again write a condition which will be a true, false, and will write that condition on this business object. Right? We already know that whenever we are writing a condition, we do that on the related business object. A true false KLC field. In our case, we want to add all instances. And then what is that? I want to sum for these instances. I want to sum the amount, but there are two amount fields. You can see some of these allowances for the worker are weekly. Some of the other allowances are monthly. You cannot directly add 5,000 to 500. This has to be converted into a monthly value or an annual value. Right again, the overall total base pay of the worker is shown in terms of annualized value. Right? This is the total base pay of the worker per annum. Ideally, I want to show this in everything in the same frequency, and we usually show composition in terms of annual frequency. When I'm creating a KLC field, there's a field code amount which shows me the amount of that allowance. But then there's also a field called annualized amount. This is again a Workday delivered field and it automatically annualizes the value. Right, if this is 5,000 per month Workday, converts it into 5,000 into L and gets the annualized value. This it would again convert into the annualized value. Whenever we are doing this, currency related calculations, keep in mind, consider all of these aspects. I'm taking annualized amount and will run this. When I run this, I'm expecting an error and will build from there. Let's first run this report. Right, I'm getting an error and the error says this sum related instance says it cannot sum multiple currencies. And it gives me the error for this worker, Maria Cardoza. Let's see what is happening. If I go into the worker profile, well, I cannot. And if I look at her compensation, if I see she's getting her compensation in different currencies or at least her allowances, she's getting one allowance. In Canadian dollars and couple of other allowances in US dollars. If I look at the report error, it says it cannot sum multiple currencies. USD is the currency being summed and CAD was encountered. For this instance, 55 Canadian dollars. What did we say? A numeric calculation does it. A currency calculation does what? What is a currency field? A currency field basically has two components. It has the numeric component and then the currency code. Now you cannot directly add Canadian amount or an amount which is in Canadian dollars to INR or US dollars. Whenever we are dealing with these currency related calculations, there is another factor that has to be considered. Are our calculations or are our values in the same base currency? For that, we'll have to create another calculated field, which is called a currency conversion. Basically, what I'll have to do is before adding these annualized amounts for each of the allowance plan, I'll have to make sure that they are in the same currency. Instead of directly taking this annualized amount, I'll first convert this annualized amount into a single currency. I'll come in here. I'll create a new calculated field and this calculate. If you see the moment I do that, Workday automatically selects the related business object. All of these have to be done on the RPO. I'm calling it. This can field called convert currency and I'm calling it USD conversion. This time I want to take the annualized amount. And I want to first convert it into a single currency, and I'm taking USD. I want to first convert it into a target currency, and currency conversions are effective dated. Right. If you go in here, the conversion rates changes over time. Yeah. I'll say do the conversion as of today, which is whenever I'm running that report. And there are different conversion types available. Again, this is something which I think you would have covered as part of your basic training in compensation. This is the default conversion types maintained for the tenant. Workday uses that. Again, will not go in those details. And I'm saying return 0 on error. Always use that wherever applicable or available. Now, what I'm doing is I'm taking for each worker, I'm taking their or reading the each allowance. For that worker, taking the annualized amount of that allowance, converting it into USD. If it is already in USD, then nothing happens. 1-to-1 conversion and then adding that allowance into this gap. Now let's run this report. This time it runs fine without giving me any errors. And it is giving me the overall amount again. We can probably do calculation for one worker and see how it works. It is 500 per month. This worker also has a weekly component. Right? It will be difficult. Let's pull some worker who doesn't have a weekly component. And we'll see if the calculation works fine. And see if it is working fine. $5 per week. That's all right because we are using a workday delivered field to get the annualized amount. It will automatically get us the right amount. Right. That's fine. Let's see if this value is being shown in. In US dollars, I would. Here, instead of showing currency symbol, I want to show currency code. That way it shows on a different app. There are two options. One, issue currency symbol. And we do that system only shows me the currency symbol. The other option is we can show currency code column. Then it shows a separate column. Here I'll just show currency symbol and we'll see it. Doing that because we then have to create another calculated field. If I go back and we run this report, right? And this is show currency symbol. Well, what we'll do is we'll pick some worker who base pay is not in US dollars, and that's why I added a separate column. Oh, every worker is in USD. That's fine. Alright, now I have the total base pay amount of the worker. I also have the total allowances of the worker, which means I can now create a new call field to basically get the overall compensation for the worker, which would be the sum of total base pay and total allowances. I'm going to edit. I'm creating a new call field, and this is of type arithmetic calculation. I'll call it total compensation. Now there are two types of arithmetic calculations you can get to. One is a numeric. When I say numeric, let's say I want to add h or subtract or multiply or divide, which is a numeric number. I want to maybe add number 5 to it for whatever reasons. This is an arithmetic calculation of type numeric, which is straightforward, right? And then if I'm using division or multiplication or whatever, probably I can specify the rounding criteria, right, if that is a requirement. This is straightforward when I'm doing arithmetic calculation for numeric fields. However, when I'm doing arithmetic calculation for currency fields, I'll also have to specify the currency code. Once again, the same logic, we cannot add or multiply or divide amounts in different currencies. When I'm doing this calculation, Workday would ask me to specify the base currency or the currency in which all amounts are expected. Now here, and this is why I was checking whether there is some worker in a non-USD. Let's say I select US dollars here. In that case, what would happen is if a worker's compensation, let's say total base pay, is in non-US dollars Again, system would give an error. Once again, this currency code field, it basically lets the calculated field know or understand that all fields that we would be referencing here. We would be referencing total base pay amount, for example. We are adding total base pay amount to that KLC field we created. Any workers now here, every worker's total base pay amount is in US dollars. But then if any worker's total base pay amount is not in US dollars, then system would give us an error. Right. All values are to be expected in US dollars. Instead of saying US dollars, and this is especially true for scenarios. Let's say this report gets me data for employees. Now we know what happened. Actually, there are two delivered fields. One is total base pay amount, and then there is another worker delivered field, which is also called total base pay amount with a hyphen in between. This worker delivered field, and that's why I was wondering how come every employee has that compensation in US dollars. Again, this is a Workday delivered field. What it does is it automatically converts the compensation in the default currency of the employee. Because my default currency is US dollar. Again, we spoke about default currency, I think, yesterday. It shows compensation in my default currency, and that's why for every employee, total base pay amount is being displayed in their default currency. This another field. If I can copy this, again a Workday delivered field. Let me search for total base pay amount. Which is this one. And this field. This shows the total base pay in their actual compensation or the currency in which they get their compensation. Right. While this field was fine till now, this field is what we are going to use now. I'll come in here. I'll show currency symbol. I'll remove it from here because we know this is any which was in US dollars. Right. I'll remove column from here. I'll just add a symbol. Now let's run this report and we'll see how it differs. When I go in here, wherever my base, the currency of the employee's US dollar system shows the same amount, right? Because Logan McNeil Sheher compensation is in US dollar. System actually shows the same amount, but there would be a difference when my actual compensation is non-USD. In that case, right now it shows if you see the actual currencies of the employee. Let's take maybe Australian dollars, GBP, and we'll filter a few workers. Alright, here, if you see, this is if I open Scott Wilkinson. Look at his compensation and compensation. His actual compensation is 1,814,830.9.62. My preferred currency is US dollars. System also shows me all compensation in my preferred currency. And if you see, it's showing me the conversion that shows 1 Canadian dollars is 0.73 US dollars. It is equivalent to 108 to 62. And that's what I get in terms of US dollars. Right. Both of these are Workday delivered field and I can leverage them wherever I want. Right. I'm creating a new calc field. Arithmetic calculation. I'm calling it total comp. Currency. First, we'll do USD conversions. I'm taking USD and this is already showing me data in terms of USD. Right. I'll take this. Total base pay amount. And I'll add it to the value, which is being that which is allowance amount. Right. This is straightforward. I'm converting everything into US dollar. Also show currency symbol. Yo. Right. If I want, I can use some formatting to show decimal places if I want to. Go. Right. This is in terms of US dollars. Now let's say I also want to show this amount in the base currency of the employee. I can see their base pay in terms of US dollars is this. If here, this is strange. I don't know why. Again, this is That should be fine. But anyway, I can see that the base pay in their local currency is this, their base pay in US dollars is this, their allowance in US dollars is this, and their total compensation in US dollars is this. But I also want to know their total compensation in their own local currency. Right? It could be US dollars, it could be Canadian dollars, it could be GBP or anything else. Now that becomes a bit tricky because if you remember when we did our currency conversion, right, for our allowances, we had to explicitly define the currency in which the conversion would happen. Right? You, if you come in here, right? When we created this, we had to explicitly specify a single currency. The problem with converting it into the base currency of the employee is different employees can have different base currency, right? Someone could be Canadian, someone could be Australian, and on and forth. Now for that there's an option available. Now I'm taking the total compensation which we created just now. And I want earlier we calculated total compensation in terms of US dollars. We took total base amount which is in US dollars. We took the allowance amount which we calculated in US dollars. Right. And then we simply added it. This total compensation is in terms of US dollars. Now I'm taking that total compensation, which is this. And if you see, I can only specify one currency here. If I say USD, I get that. But if I say CD, because some employees' compensation could be in Canadian dollars, then it overrides US dollars. I can only specify one currency code. But if I specify one currency code, system will give me an error for all the other. Or it wouldn't work for all the other employees because other employees have their base salary is in different currencies. In that case, what we can do is we can use this field which is base pay currency. There are a number of fields available. What I would actually want to do is I want to check for each individual in which currency are they getting their base pay. In which currency are they being paid their base salary, and automatically convert the total compensation into that base currency. Instead of specifying a static currency like US dollars or Canadian dollars. What I'm saying is take this total compensation and convert the compensation into that currency in which the base salary of the employee is specified. Right. And I'll say today now, I think this will give me an error because in our system, some employees don't have any base currency. Again, this is a test system. People create all sorts of data. If there is no base currency available for some employee, then this calculate would give an error. But in real life, that doesn't happen. Right. Currency conversions and currency calculations are the trickiest bit when it comes to reporting. And also the fact that when you do these conversions, your actual value changes by a fraction or probably more. When you are converting something into US dollars and rounding it, and then reconverting it back and then re-rounding it, then your actual value would differ at times. It becomes tricky when you're dealing with calculations related to currency conversion. Let's see if I can pull some worker real quick who is not in US dollars. The total base pay in US dollars is 64 zinzin. The total base pay in local currency is 34,000, which is basically 34,400 here plus the allowance, which is 925 in US dollars. It would be less in terms of GDP, and it is giving me 500 GBN, but 34 plus 500, which is 39 out of 34, 912. This is how you can do conversions, currency conversions, to deal with your currency related values. Please do like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@therightuptalk.com.